welcome to Super Dwarf Sunday for September 4th, 2022. And for everywhere in the world that celebrates Labor Day, happy Labor Day, which in the United States is Monday, September 5th. Since we last visited in August Super Dwarf Sunday, TC and Ryder, our two super dwarf reticulated pythons from Reach Out Reptiles, have both shed and they're doing just fine. In this episode, you're going to get to see both of our super dwarfs. You're going to get to see both of them doing a training session and eating. I feel like it's been a while since TC's had to work very hard during a training session. And I thought, since he spent 19 days free in the house, yes, 19 days, he was free in one of the rooms of the house that is snake-proof, I thought that I would have him work a little bit for his reinforcer. He spent 19 days loose. I was hoping he would catch a mouse that was in that room that had come in during some heavy rains. We live on a ranch. We have field mice. Sometimes they get in the house when there's bad weather outside. He was completely useless as a mouse eradicator, as a rodent eradicator. Completely useless. I let one of my Brettles pythons out and she got 2 mice in 2 nights. So I don't know if there's anything to be said for that other than all of my rodent eradicators that have actually caught wild field mice that have gotten into the house have been Morelia Bredli. However, they're not going to just sit and hang out with you or be as friendly with you as super dwarf reticulated pythons are, so I guess it's a trade-off. TC and Ryder are both super friendly snakes. So TC got to spend nearly 3 weeks loose. He then shed and then rested another day, and then, as you might imagine, was hungry, and he started to move around and want out of that room and move around too much in the house. I put him back in his enclosure. He threw an absolute fit and tantrum, and he fell I don't know how many times. I kept hearing him climbing and falling and climbing and falling and trying to get out of the door. I ignored that because he does have to spend some time in his enclosure. And what if I'm gone and he has to spend several days in his enclosure or something? So I left him in his enclosure for 2 days and he was not happy. So I did a training session with him sort of as a reward, and also I thought maybe he would be especially motivated to train after shedding and resting and spending a couple of days in his enclosure. So the training session that you're going to see with Tausetti, I asked him to shift out of his enclosure and across the room about 8 feet over one of the dog kennels and then onto this activity stand. It took him over 6 minutes. I will obviously speed that footage up for you. And then Ryder, I just targeted him out of his tent, which is around his tree, which he seems very content to live in. Notice that TC immediately started coming down from where he was when he saw the target, but then he stopped. I think that he wanted to see if, because the target wasn't moving and I was standing right there and he'd already made the effort to acknowledge the target was there, if I was going to go ahead and reinforce for that. And I moved the target in front of his face and then repositioned it to his right to let him know, no, I'm not reinforcing for that. I want you to change locations. You would never do this with a beginning learner. You would never do this if you were still in the beginning stages of target training. You would actually want to reinforce every tiny baby step, every approximation. TC's been doing this for 3 years, and he understands that if I reposition the target and I keep moving it, that he is to go further and further and keep moving in the direction of the target until I flatten it, at which time then he will receive his reinforcer. But I do want to emphasize that he's an experienced learner. He's been doing this for over 3 years, and this is not something that you would expect an inexperienced learner to do, or that you would start doing too soon in the training process. This is a long time coming, a behavior like the one you're seeing right now, where he is traveling a pretty far distance from where we started.
There was kind of a big space between that dog kennel and the bird perch we're using as a snake tree. So I was trying to help TC out a little bit by cueing him to climb up onto that other reptile enclosure. And then I was going to target him across to the bird perch. But he didn't want to climb onto the other reptile enclosure, at least not in that channel where the light goes, which he's climbed in there many times on his own. So I think he was just focused on the snake tree because he knew ultimately that that's where we were going, because he's done this before. I moved that training sword. It's called a shinai. It's a bamboo training sword for martial arts. I moved it and created a bridge between the other reptile enclosure and the bird perch that I wanted him to move onto, just so that he didn't have to try and traverse that big expanse between the reptile enclosure and the perch, or the dog kennel and the perch, because he was gripping onto the reptile enclosure, onto these little tiny ledges that are on the front that barely stick out, that hold the door in, instead of actually climbing up onto the roof of the enclosure where he would have been more secure. And I just didn't want him to fall and have this whole training session, which was going very well, to totally fall apart. And that's why I moved the shinai there for him to climb across, so that it would just give him a bridge and a more secure way to get from where he was over to the bird perch. I wanted to put things in perspective for you here and show you the distance that Tao said he actually traversed, and also show you his enclosure once again. If you're new to the channel or you haven't seen any of the videos where I've done an enclosure tour, this is Tao Seti's enclosure. He's got lots of stuff in there: sky hides at different levels, nets at different levels, PVC perching at different levels, real branches at different levels. He has 3 humid hides. He has a swimming pool and 2 other water features in there, a drinking bowl, and then a bin that he can actually get inside with the water, because I've got holes in all of the sides around the perimeter of the bin. But the total distance that he traveled, if we include not just the horizontal distance, but also the vertical distance that he had to travel as he was going up and down from where he started to where I delivered the reinforcer, was 10.83 feet. So it was 130 inches, which is about 10.8 feet. So he went almost 11 feet during that training session. Ryder is not on the bottom level of the snake tree apparatus very often. Usually when he starts getting hungry, he gets into an ambush position from one of the higher levels, which is where he spends most of his time. However, if he does that 1 or 2 nights in a row and I don't feed him, then he gets down on that bottom level and he lurks. So there's a big open space behind this 10-gallon terrarium, and he will stretch out his whole body back there and then lurk around the corner of the terrarium the way you just saw, with his head and neck. And I was just simply going to target him right out of the tent onto the desk. However, I guess that was too easy for him, and he decided that he didn't want to do that, maybe he didn't want to come out onto the desk for some reason, although he's been on it many times. He decided that he wanted to do the target training session and earn his reinforcer by climbing up onto the top of his little 10-gallon terrarium, which is what he used to live in before he decided to move into the tree. And he climbed over the top of it and started looking at me and looking for the reinforcer. And he's a very beginning learner, so I couldn't push him too far. And at the point where he was starting to lose focus with the target and look for the food, I went ahead and reinforced him. Ryder got 2 training repetitions during this session, as did TC. And Ryder got 2 rat fuzzies for his 2 sessions. And TC had a jumbo mouse during repetition number 1. And during repetition number 2, he's getting a rat pup. And I absolutely did not want him interfering with Ryder. As you could see, he was starting to head towards the couch and towards my desk. And Ryder was there eating. I didn't want him to bother Ryder, try to get the food out of Ryder's mouth. I mean, who knows what could happen. So I asked TC to completely turn 180 degrees away from where he was headed and go in the opposite direction. And I'm deliberately targeting him behind the snake tree to the back side of the snake tree so that when I reinforce him and he's eating his food, he and Ryder are on opposite sides of this training arena, and they're not looking at each other and they're not headed in each other's direction whatsoever. You know what I realized as I was watching this and editing, I didn't flatten the target to mark the end of the behavior. I believe that likely confused TC just a little bit. I held the target at an angle, and I always completely changed the orientation of the target from vertical to horizontal to mark the end of the behavior and let TC know that he is finished, he doesn't have to do any more, and that he's going to get reinforced. And I didn't do that for some reason. As you watch Ryder finishing up his meal, I wanted to interject to let you know that I ended up not speeding up any of the footage. What I did was cut out sections where the snakes were pausing and assessing and taking time to evaluate what was going on before they decided how to proceed. And that just looks like a big pause where the snakes aren't moving for a few seconds. And so I just cut things like that out rather than speed up footage.